All right, YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So let's get right into this video. I want to talk about God and the refining process, right? And let's start it off with the scripture. So in Isaiah chapter 48, verse 10, God says, "See, I have refined you, though not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction." So when God comes to you, when you see who God is, when you start to see that, okay, this is the truth, right? Like, this is the actual way. Like, Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." You start to see what the actual truth of the world is. And whenever he does come to you, he meets you in any stage of your life. But likely he met you at a stage of your life where you had a lot of questions. You were maybe living a pretty decent life, but also you were unfulfilled. You were doing things that you know were not right, but you were still doing them because you thought that was like the normal thing to do. Not knowing that like the things that you were doing were actually leading you into a bad path, right? So when he does come to you, he starts to reveal all the impurities from you. He starts to reveal your pride. So you might lose something that was really connected to your ego, right? You might lose like, it could be like a lot of money or something. Or you could go through like another suffering that you could have lost like your health for a little bit. For a certain amount of time, like you could have got like a sickness or like some type of problem or like a bad injury or something. Just all of a sudden, right? Like as soon as you met God, then all of a sudden like a lot of these things started happening. It's like all this chaos started happening, right? So God does this for a reason. So he does it for his glory because you start to see that God is the one that's right. God is the one that's powerful. God is the one that knows the truth, is the creator of the universe. God is the truth, right? So you start to go through really painful experiences, really tough experiences that change the trajectory of your whole life. You start to change as a person. You start to change your views on everything. You start to see what you were doing was not the right thing to do. You start to learn everything, right? So he has to pretty much remove everything that's not benefiting you. Even if it feels like it's benefiting you, it's not benefiting you. So he has to like rip all these things away from you. Whether that could be like a job that maybe you were making like a lot of money or something, but you know you didn't truly like that job and it was causing you problems. He might rip that away from you, right? And that's just an example, but he does this on purpose because this changes you as a person. It refines you. He exposes yourself to you, right? Like whenever you lose these things, your pride comes out. You start to get prideful. You're like, wait, what just happened, right? You get hit in the pride. You start to get down and everything. You're like, what just happened? Like, what's going on? And he brings out like anger because you could be going through like multiple forms of suffering. This is a refining period, so it's multiple. It's not just like a loss of one thing, but it's a loss of many different things and like a lot of chaos, a lot of problems, like back to back hits, right? So whenever you go through this refining process, it feels like you're burning. It feels like your whole life is crumbling apart, right? It feels like everything's just disappearing left and right. Like your income's disappearing, your health is disappearing, relationships are disappearing, your own sense of self is disappearing, right? He basically shows you that you were pretty much living a lie and it wasn't for you. You were leading yourself into destruction without knowing, right? But during the refining process, you don't realize this. This is why he makes your pride come out. You might think that like he's causing pain on you for no reason, right? So you might get angry at God. He brings out your anger. He really brings out your personality because he brings it out in front of your face and you start to see yourself for who you are. Then you're like, okay, wait, I did react this way. I did think this way about this, but I didn't know it was wrong, right? So he causes you to get humble. He causes you to have different desires. He causes you to see the desires that you had were not right. Like they were pointless, right? And so it hits really hard. So if you're going through this type of season, you have to endure the season. But while you're going through the season though, every single day you start turning into this better person. You start to realize that you don't need those things that you used to think you need. You don't need to think a certain way. You don't need to view things like you used to, right? You start to change as a person every single day. So he has to refine you until you become perfect, right? And the reason I put quotation marks is because God is the only perfect one, but we're made in the image of God who is perfect. But we don't know everything like God, right? So he has to pretty much burn everything until you're perfect in his eyes, right? So he has to expose the sin to your face, right? You're gonna get convicted. If you're ever like sexually immoral, right? And that's something that everyone's gone through. Most people have gone through that because we've all throughout life, like the world has always preached it like it was normal, right? Being sexually immoral. Um, if you were like that during the refining period, you might start to see that it's the wrong thing to do. You'll start to feel like convicted. You'll start to feel guilty, right? And not guilty in a shameful way, but you start to have this feeling that it's wrong. It's like the wrong thing you did. So you'll get hit in the pride. You'll get hit really hard and realize that was the wrong thing to do. Like maybe you're like manipulating people. Maybe you're hurting other people. Maybe you're just living selfishly, right? So he reveals all these things to you. And this is why during the refining period also, you might go through situations that you have done to other people and those people then do to you. Or not the same people, but random people do to you. So you kind of get hit with this like judgment, right? Because in the refining period, you could also get hit with judgment. But it's always for your benefit, right? Because if God judges you in this life, then that's a good thing because he cares. He doesn't just let you keep doing all these things and destroying yourself. So he has to reveal these things to you. So it's gonna hurt, right? You start to see yourself from a selfish point of view, and he turns it into a selfless point of view. Because it's all to make you like Jesus, right? It's all to make you how he was, selfless, loving, living in the spirit, not pleasing the flesh, right? So that's what he does. And before you become like that, you're gonna have to go through this period. And this period could be a really long time, especially if you're resistant to the period, right? This is why you can't resist it. Because the more you resist it, the more you're gonna keep suffering. You're gonna have to just keep doing it until you finally surrender. You're like, okay, God, I'm gonna listen to you. Do as you please, pretty much, right? So while you're going through this period, day by day, you start to change. You start to become a better person. You start to realize that you're thinking differently. You start viewing things differently. You start to see the truth about things and what you're doing. So you start to become a more disciplined person. You start to become a stronger person, right? Because God shows you that whenever you're pleasing your flesh, the whole time you're just hurting yourself. So he shows you through scripture as well. He'll show you just scriptures. He'll say, the flesh reaps destruction, right? You'll see many different scriptures and everything coming out correlated to what's going on in your life. He'll start to reveal the truth. So if you're someone that's constantly living in the flesh, just like I said, you're living in pride, you're living in sexual immorality, you're living in all these things, he will reveal that to you. And he'll show you what you're actually doing. He'll show you that you're leading yourself into more problems on the road, destruction, right? You're going to end up destroying yourself. If you're someone who's really arrogant, you're prideful and everything, you're selfish, he'll show you what you're doing, and you'll lose the things that made you prideful, right? Maybe money made you prideful. Maybe something, whatever it was that made you prideful, you end up losing. They gave you a lot of arrogance. You'll end up losing, and then you won't have that thing. And then God sees how you react. He's like, okay, how's he or she going to react now? They don't have the thing that they held so closely, right? And he sees that, so he brings that out. And then because that comes out, then you start to get angry, right? He starts to see how you react. And whenever you get angry, you let it all out. You might be mad at God or something. And then you start to see yourself. It's like, wait, hold up. I reacted this strongly to this thing. He pretty much reveals it to you. Then you realize what you were doing. Then you realize that you were deceiving yourself. You're like, oh, wait, I really am doing this, right? So God views all of his believers as children, right? Children of God. So pretty much it's, imagine if you had a child, right? And the child was always eating candy and like unhealthy things like just candy and all that stuff, and you rip that candy away from the child, and you're never going to give it back, right? And that child may start crying or start getting angry, having a meltdown and everything because you took the candy away, right? But you know that it's bad for them. It's going to rot their teeth. It's going to hurt their health. It's going to make them lazier. It's going to hurt them, right? It's going to end up destroying them if they keep doing it. So that's what God does to you. It's pretty much like he's ripping like the candy away from your hand, right? The instant gratification, the sin. So he rips that all away from you. And then you're left with the stuff you have to deal with. So all the impurities are going to come out first. So you're going to be angry. Your pride's going to come out. Your whole personality is going to come out. The way you think and everything, it's all going to come out. And then all that stuff gets purged. And that's what God does. He brings all that stuff out of you, and then it gets purged. And then you figure out that was the right thing to do. And this is why God does it for his glory, because then you see that God was right the whole time. He was the one that was right. And you're going to follow him forever now. And that's what God does. So it benefits your life because you go from being an undisciplined person, a person living in the flesh, a person thinking one way, to a disciplined person, a person who pleases the Spirit. You live in the Spirit. You start denying the flesh, right? You start not listening to your flesh. You start listening to your Spirit. Because with living in the Spirit, you reap eternal life. You have a life living in the Spirit. Living in the flesh, you reap death, right? Everything has two sides to it. So if you decide to live in pleasure first, you're going to suffer later. If you decide to suffer first, you're going to have pleasure later, right? So you have to pick which side. If you choose the enemy's side, which is pleasure first, you don't realize what's coming after. You don't realize the amount of suffering that's coming after. And that's what God saves you from, because Jesus came to save, right? Not to condemn. This is why he has to reveal everything to you. No matter how tough it is, he's going to show it right in your face. He's going to make it to where there's no way to hide from it. You see the truth and everything. And then you're like, okay, God is right. Like, I wasn't doing the right thing. I was not doing the right thing. So he has to do all of this until you become this perfect person, right? And you become perfect as in you're perfect in God's eyes. You become holy, right? He makes you holy. He doesn't let you just keep going to sin, right? Every time you go to sin, every time you decide to run to sin, you get convicted. And you get hit in the face again with the effects of sin. You're like, okay, now I'm feeling bad. Like, I feel tired, I feel weak, I feel undisciplined and everything. You always realize the effects of it. So then you go back to God. You're like, okay, just got to obey God. Because if I don't, I'm going to suffer through this, right? I'm going to think I'm doing the right thing if I'm going to end up suffering, right? But yeah, I know you guys can resonate with this video, especially if you're going through this season or if you went through this type of season. This type of season is only to make you a better person, a more wholesome person, a person who's lacking nothing, right? Not a person that's constantly itching for everything else, more of this, more of that. Because the flesh is never satisfied, right? The more you please the flesh, the more hungry it actually gets, right? Anything you do of the flesh, it's never something that could truly be something that you could do a little bit. It's always gonna expand, right? It's pretty much, living in the flesh is pretty much the exact same thing as doing a drug, right? Like an addictive drug. You could say, oh, I'm only gonna do this a few times, right? But that's a lie. But I'm only gonna do this a few times. I won't get addicted. But if you're doing an addictive drug, it's addictive, right? So you're gonna do it one time and be like, okay, I'm never going to do this again. Then another time comes, you start to rationalize, right? Be like, okay, I'm going to do this today, but this is the last time I'm going to do it. Then that happens, then you do it again. And then you start doing it every day, and then you become addicted, right? That's the same way the flesh works. Drugs are also from the flesh as well. Not saying that maybe people are on medications and stuff, like drugs to actually help them, right? For whatever they need, for like a sickness or whatever it is, for mental issue. That's different. But the flesh is pretty much the same thing as like an addictive drug. So when you keep living in the flesh, it's like you're pretty much living in fire, right? It's just gonna expand. It's not gonna be something that you could just be like, oh, I could only do it a few times. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that because it gets hungry and hungry and hungry and never satisfied, right? While the spirit is satisfied, you live in satisfaction. With the flesh, you'll never be satisfied. You'll never ever be satisfied because it's instant pleasure, and instant pleasure is something that will never be satisfied. You're just gonna want more and more and more and more and more until you destroy yourself, right? And that's what God saves you from. This is why God says to deny the flesh, because it only reaps destruction. Well, the spirit reaps eternal life. You have a life with the spirit when you live in your spirit. So, but yeah, that's pretty much the whole video. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, don't forget to like, don't forget to comment. And if you're not subscribed already, don't forget to subscribe. All right, God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.